it's hard to cultivate that through like what we're doing right now. It's hard to join into something like that where you might just be grabbing a coffee and then you pass a business card and then you shoot somebody a text or an email for a coffee, and then that coffee leads to doing business together 3, 4, 5 months later. Like, it's hard to artificially cultivate that now, I'd say. Not that we've been aggressively trying to do that, because we're maybe further along like that startup journey to kind of building the customer base and like the business who's going to help us out connections. But still, it's, yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a mental lapse there.
Yeah, it took me about 2 months of straight doing video calls like this all the time for me to start to be comfortable in this space. And I'm an incredible extrovert, right? Like, I love being around people. And I'm realizing now that there are people that were extreme extroverts in the real world, but then when they flip into this telepresence world, the strategies, the tactics, all the things that they did to make them feel comfortable, they aren't there. And so in addition to the fact that you don't have as many random people that you just run into, also the same skill set that you would normally use to like strike up a conversation doesn't always feel like it's working in the same way as it is in real life.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's completely redundant, because like from a communication perspective, like the same sort of rhythms follow even virtually. But in terms of how you have to kind of coordinate how you present yourself through mediums like this now, it's like it's an entirely different game than putting on something decent and meeting somebody for a coffee. You've got to make sure that, like what's your environment look like? How are you presenting yourself? What is, I guess, just the optics of having to communicate through a medium like this instead of live and in person. There's so many nuances that come into like the perspectives that people will carry away if they have like an interaction with you like this and your environment is subpar, and they'll compare that in their head, even if it's subconsciously, against a interaction that they've had that was, maybe higher grade. Like, say somebody who's having a video conference with you, who's clearly got your setup dialed in from the podcast and everything else, versus somebody else who might just throw it up in, the corner desk in their bedroom with bad lighting and blah, 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 and sounds bouncing off the wall and whatever else.
Yeah. And there's like little things that if you do them, they will benefit you for the rest of the time that you ever have this telepresence thing where you're trying to teleport your image and your sound and your presence to another person. And I think the most important one that costs nothing at all is everybody should have their cameras at eye level. Like, it is a totally different experience to be on a video call with somebody where they're looking at the camera versus when they're looking above you or looking down on you. Like, just the very act of bringing your camera up makes it so two human beings feel like they're looking at each other.
Right. Yeah. Not just how you're perceived, but how you're having the conversation too. I mean, I've got you on top of like 4 books right now on my laptop, and like it feels more like I'm looking at you, like your eye level to me on the screen, versus if I was like, up here looking down. Like, the perception is everything, and you're creating that more so consciously through this.
I had a client a couple of weeks ago reach out to me and say, hey, we want to do something new and interesting. And we came up with the idea of like, hey, I could help your whole organization do telepresence better. And we were kind of talking and fitting through this idea. And then I talked to another client I had, and I just happened to mention it. And they were like, I want it. I want it right now. I want it on Thursday of next week. My people need this because we have transitioned. We used to be spending money on sending people to dinners and take our clients out to baseball games. And we don't have any of that anymore. And so now all the interactions are happening online. And I'm asking people to convert something that took them, an entire lifetime to build up the career skills to be able to interact with people. And now I've dropped out the medium and they can't go meet in person. So we want to do something different. And the act of going through and trying to explain, how did I learn the things that I did to light a stage or to make the camera be right or to make your sound be good? It takes a long, long, long time to isolate out what does somebody need to know.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you've obviously been ahead of the curve on some of that stuff. So it's easy to see like where the value would be there to transmit, and like having to, especially in like a business scenario, it's one thing like families, and it's almost been nice, in some of those kind of subtle ways. Like, we're hopping on like the family Zooms and stuff more than we ever did before, where it's like, all right, everybody knows how to use Zoom now. Let's just shoot out this link and have, the cousins and the uncles and whoever hop on. Right. But like and it's okay if quality or stuff is subpar, like you could be on your phone, like driving or something, and it's just kind of passe or whatever. But if it is like a business scenario, you do have to kind of take it more seriously. Like I've had to do a couple like business interactions on here, and they've like, some of them have been like bluntly subpar. It was funny, like you were even picking me apart that one day in terms of like my surroundings and like kind of giving those tidbits. But like, you have to put the mental effort in to present yourself well through these now, so that you can convey yourselves, or so that we can convey ourselves the way that we want to build those interactions.
Yeah, and I think the biggest component of the telepresence is the one you can't see. It's sound.
Yeah.
Right? Like one of the things that I learned from the podcast is it does not matter if I have a beautiful guest and they have a beautiful background and just everything about them is glowing and warm. If every time they speak, it hurts my ears, it's either too loud or there's weird echo or there's weird stuff in it, I don't care how amazing they are. I don't want to hear it, because it's my brain saying like, there's not enough signal here to make it worth this noise. And so when people are making these changes, they look at their cameras or they look at their telepresence and they think, oh, I got to go buy a new camera. I got to get a bunch of lighting. And really the very first thing everybody should work on is make sure you sound good. Because if you don't sound good, nobody cares what you think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, all you got to do, I mean, I guess I've got a special setup today, but all I've got to do is plug in something like this, right? I mean, like how, especially like people have been on Zoom calls now for months, like out of necessity. How many times have we been on a group call where there's that one person who's talking and then they're like, and they're like fizzling out, right? Like you never want to be that person on the call. And it's like, it's one of those kind of like cringe moments where you're like on the call and you're like, oh gosh, now like what's the stature of how long do we wait this person if it's like, you know, the signal's fizzling out, whatever.
That was one of the big things that the second client, the one that wanted it right now to make this telepresence video, they were like, the other thing we want is tell us some etiquette. We don't care what the rules are. We just want to all have the same rules. So I started talking about like, how long do you wait if you're a moderator with somebody having bad sound before you jump in? Like who's responsible for it? And then who is responsible if the moderator isn't jumping in? You go 30 seconds and you're like, oh my gosh, I just wish they would shut up or stop talking. When are you responsible for it? And I think these are the types of conversations that if an organization takes just a little bit of time to focus on how do we help people sound better, feel more confident, and know how to behave, now every single meeting has a higher throughput. You can get more done. People feel happier. I think it's going to make a huge difference on what work environments are positive and which ones are negative.
Yeah. It'll change work environments that are pre-existing for sure. The conventions that will come up, I mean, it's like anything. When there's like a paradigm shift, we're social creatures. And if there's a paradigm shift in how we interact, like new conventions will arise to like structure how those interactions take place. And like there will begin to be breakdowns between what's the socially acceptable and what's not socially acceptable. And of course, like I'm probably like over speaking in terms of something like telepresence, but, and you know, unconventional, but there will be conventional norms that arise where it's like, okay, there's the guy who's typing on his keyboard and he shouldn't be typing. There's the guy who like gets up and leaves when you're in a group conference, and it's like, they're going to be like looked down upon by the individuals on that call. Cause it's like, you know, when you're in a teleconference call or something, like there might be a slide up, or maybe I'm looking at you right now, but if we're in a group meeting and there's 5 other bubbles over here on my left side, like you're able to zoom in and see these individual interactions of people on those calls now in a way that you could in a conference room or say like any other group interaction. But especially like for something like a webinar, if you're doing a presentation, you've got 20, 30 people on, like you can sit there and just check out what people are doing. If you're a listener, you can check out what other people are doing. And it's a weird thing.
No doubt, man. Like you think about telepresence, and at first the introvert might seem like the person that's at a disadvantage here, because they're like, oh, I don't really like talking with people anyway, and now I'm doing it in this scenario. But I've been talking with people that are naturally introverts and being like, hey, you know that they just gave you a superpower, right? Because everybody's going to have a video camera trained on their faces. So when they're talking, you can put their face up on a big screen and you can stare at them in a way that you never could before. You could be looking for, what is their facial reactions trying to tell me? What is their body language all about? In a way that if you were in a meeting, you can look at somebody, but you can't just sit there and stare at them. So all these things that are perceived disadvantages, put in the right context, can be huge advantages.
Right. Like it could be a learning experience. Maybe you're saying for like those individuals to kind of be able to like leverage that to hone in on social cues.
Absolutely. And like you can be in a meeting, and if that meeting got recorded because somebody wasn't going to be able to be there, you can go back and say, hey, I kept getting interrupted. I wonder why that is. And then you go and watch yourself interacting with people. Like I go back and watch myself on these podcasts, and there are moments when I've interrupted my guest and I'm like, ooh, why didn't I see at the time that I was doing that? What was wrong with me that I didn't know that? And so now you have this new medium, and it could become a little Black Mirror-esque, right? You could watch and rewatch every single thing you do. But if you use it for like, hey, that interaction didn't go well, normally your memory is, well, because that guy's a jerk and he kept doing jerk things to me. But you may go back and be like, oh, I didn't realize that my sound kind of faded out and they were jumping in because they were trying to help me out. Like you're able to see context in a way that you couldn't because you have this new medium that records.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, I guess, to be able to look at it, because I don't know how often you check yourself out on your setup, but I know it's like, I guess speaking bluntly, I feel like everybody would have to, but I know like I see myself checking myself. It's like we've been maybe programmed to think that way from things like social medias or whatever else. Like I hate to throw out the social medias, like not to blame card, but it's the social media thing.